Hi everybody, it's really nice to see so many new faces and so many old faces. If I fall asleep during my presentation, please knock me because I'm awfully jet lagged. But I have to be quick because I thought I had more time, so let's do this together. I'm going to talk about a project I did. It's a project I love doing. It's not my main project, but I will talk about something that you could phrase the Chinese diaspora of Burning Man, and I'm going to give a disclaimer. I'm not going to talk about Chineseness, and I'm not an expert in Chineseness, but I will give you a bit of an idea of the voices of the people I interviewed, and I'm going to frame this with these three themes. These are big questions. Each of these questions could be a whole 3 years project, I guess, but it's going to inform a little bit my argument of why I think there is some very specific localized thing happening over there, mainly at Dragon Burn in China. This is the FHA from last year, and something I notice in, as an expert and as an event organizer, also I do psytrance events and things like that. People ask me, they come to me sometimes and they're like, some underground, I'm so desperate, I need some connection, I need really something where I feel I can be transformed. So people know this term transformative festival culture. It's a bit of a buzzword, and researchers sometimes are doing their thing to that. And so I always answer with one thing. I say, have you discovered Dragon Burn yet? Because this is what I find comes close to this sort of transformative culture there. And then 90% of the cases, the answer is a bit like this. Well, like even if I went in China, do you allow this here? I mean, here we have a lot of regional contact people here, so you might not be so surprised because you look all at the map, but most people are very surprised. And then I get answers like this. So really, are naked people out at festivals, are drugs, naked, all of these things. Slightly hinting at the fact that drugs would be allowed anywhere else. I don't know. 5% of people say something like this. Wow, I imagine it must be like one of the old early burns. Sounds like a blast. And while this sounds a bit strange, it's not so far off from why I think it is. And I'm going to make the case for that. And I was really interested when you asked about whether this cacophony society is still going on. In China, there is something going on. People are actually doing it. They want to go to the big ear of China and send some audio file back to museums in Shanghai. So there is something that's not so stupid about this quote. Anyways, as I said, I'm going to give this disclaimer. China is an immensely complex but also very stable object of study, but I'm not considering myself as a Chinese expert, even though I've been an expert now for a long time. But there's a slight difference between Chineseness and doing something in China and trying to get Burning Man culture out there in China. So what did I do? I basically, I talked to community leads. I was quite involved also doing my bondage workshops and all that in the Chinese camp. And there's of course some autoethnographic elements in there because, as we've heard before, like everybody here is a little bit of a researcher in that, but in a way it's phenomenologically informed for those who know these terms. And I went to, of course, Dragonfly. So all I'm going to say and the voices I'm going to tell you about, they will mainly be mostly from visitors there. And I'm really sad that I cannot show you a picture of the non decompression that made impression on me because it would invade the privacy. And all I'm going to show, all of the quotes, you can read. I have consent from everybody that I quoted there. So it's a kind of interesting thing to ask double consent. I learned this from burners. If you're interested, so I structured this first. I talked to people at community leaders at regionals in Europe. The project kind of transformed a little bit, but there's definitely some common themes that I mentioned before. So very much about self-identification as a burner and about experiences of personal transformation. Here I refer to some theories of cultural identity and the diaspora, which is actually where this project came out of, because I had to read this text. I'm going to skip them for you because we don't need to listen to them all, but basically saying diaspora is a scattering of seeds. There's this double relationship between two different cultural homes, and with the flourishing of the regionals, I think this is kind of fitting. Also, it's the talk with this diasporic turn that comes from cultural studies to say this is like we were getting more and more away from the central authority, and you could totally apply this to burners, right? I mean, in a way, like we're kind of escaping from the Silicon Valley and millionaires and the Instagram weekend visitors and all that. So this is something that resonated in me while I was reading this theory, and I said, yes, of course, I have to do something about burners. So I think these are subjects we can study, but they're also my friends sometimes, and I think that doesn't always limit. It's an interesting mix of identities you have yourself as a researcher and as a friend sometimes. Most of my interviews I did not directly at the burns, because I think it's good to have a little safer conversation. I don't know, like sometimes you burn, you know how things are. I prefer to have coffee houses and beaches and all sorts of things for that. I said that before. So I read at the Euroburner survey that it might have been worthwhile to ask respondents to define it. Funnily enough, this is what I did without knowing that this would have been worthwhile. So I kind of found it nice. And my approach is a bit coming from this idea that community identity is constructed and maintained to this discourse, but also beyond, to lend some meaning to this kind of experience. And as you will see, like this self-identification of the burners I talked to is pretty complex. Sometimes you have to go to a negative identification to find out very much about what you want to define. This is something that you might recognize because it's an open letter to the European burners community that was posted by somebody very critical towards the burner experience. And what is highlighted here is, of course, the sparkling unicorns. I love that they indoctrinated whatever is. We can all choose, feel free. So as long as you don't choose to identify as yourself. This is what the burner doesn't like, apparently. And in my interviews, this also comes up, but in a more positive way. There it's mentioned like a choice where you place yourself. You can make burner jokes, you can celebrate, but also we put a lot into it. So this maker perspective comes always up. So I don't know. I think it definitely helped that I had these very comfortable conversations with the people, but I felt like every time we were talking about identities, it was a flood of information. People wouldn't stop. They wouldn't stop, like, to telling what is important, and this is so fascinating because this is completely a non-essentialist view of identity and a celebration of the self. But what I found so far, and this is also a little bit of an ongoing process because I have to reread the data, but the celebration of the self is very important, particularly in the Western perspective. And then the identification that is rooted in the moment of a place, and not referring back to, as you said today, like, no, you don't have to go to Burning Man at all. This is pretty clear from my data that this is not what it's about. What I frame in more scientific terms as a decentering from the cultural authority. And I thought, what are also these contrasts between like maybe the more Western and the more Eastern perspective. But again, this is tricky because you would have to do quantitative studies for that. But what I can say so far is that I think like the celebration of the self is a bit more highlighted in the European case, whereas the personal investment and the hard work and the outer framing is a bit more highlighted in the Chinese case, which is a bit of a cliche, but sometimes they're okay. Sometimes these contrasts are very subtle. So, the Western perspective would be more like we can also stand alone, or we have to be with the community. We can choose. Doesn't really matter, either community or stand alone. It's a complete contradiction, which is exactly what this diaspora identity sometimes says, by the way. Or in contrast, the inclusivity is expressed in a different way. Like we say, everybody can be a burner, as everybody should burn their passion. So also everybody can be, but you have to really burn your passion. So it's not so, it's like always these two extremes that are somehow different, and what speaks out of this for me is what I always found so fascinating with burning in China, that there's a different way of expressing this, but it boils down to something very similar. I've tried to play a little bit with that and come up with a little burner ecology of identity. This has been done before. This is not my idea. It comes from systems that want to kind of see how you can frame support systems. They want to show how the environment influences yourself, so this is very much tying in there. And these are the main themes that are actually coming up, and it relates back to other theories. Openness is not the only one, of course, that comes in the state of mind, but it really comes significantly often. So, yeah, I don't know, personally I would have said this as well. What do I mean by that? And then I highlight these two things because these are the areas where I think that East and West goes particularly well together, but where also the Berner identity would distinguish itself from this usual identity that we find, because this is all something that is not Berner specific. You know, you all have your, there's all these levels. I'm going to add a bit here. Sorry, this is a bit off, looks a bit different, but in general it looks complicated, but it's kind of simple. You know, on the doing together phase, you have this maker perspective, this interaction, yeah, an insane amount of work for not that many people. I like that it says not that many people, because again here the regional perspective comes up. And yeah, as code of conduct, I more mean like this, somebody who really lives by the principle. It's not enough to know them, you also have to live them, but this is not always so vitally important. But I think it would be very interesting to work with that and see where we could find differences in different cultures, or what would be highlighted by whom. I mean, all I can say is that it seems to be similar, both in Europe and in China. It's just sometimes expressed differently, you know, whereas a person with a very strong Chinese background will probably say, you know, we have to really abide by these principles and we need to make them more well known to people, like European Berner. I mean, I'm totally generalizing now, but a European Berner would probably more say, yeah, we can choose, you know, we can choose your principle. Okay, a little bit I'm going to tell you about this transformation. Again, like really, so it never has something to do with this big gigantism that previous research pointed out when we look at Burning Man. You know, we lose ourselves in the big sort of festival, but this is still this small community that plays a big role, and that is actually an enabler of this transformational experience on the local level. Maybe that's for people who need this kind of different kind of transformation. Maybe it's just a fact. And why I think this diaspora thing, or the regional diaspora perspective, is so cool there is because the diaspora was always, these are the ones that encountered these radical disruptions. They're constantly reproducing themselves as new transformation. And one quote I found so cool was the metaphor of a washing machine for that, you know. So it was very purifying in a sense, this person says. It was like tuning up the speed of life and jumping into a washing machine. I have to read this because it's so nice. So when you turn up the speed and everything starts to get thrown around way more, and you don't like with the life you're living get thrown up, and you get to see it, and you can either clear it or you can live with it. And it was challenging but a lot of fun. So sorry again for this being a bit off. This would be very typical. Now, when we look at this thing called dragon burn that is not in the desert, something that very often came up from my respondents was this idea that we give the whole burn. We start from a very deserted condition. What I mean is that, yeah, people say, yeah, we could offer Chinese people something, but there's always this distinction, you know, Chinese people, we have to offer it to Chinese people. So of course we cannot really get away from this imperialist status somehow there, and people are aware of that, but they also don't really know a way out of this dilemma, you know. And yeah, actually, the way community leaders see it is kind of like you start from scratch. It's the real desert, like, but you know, again, look at it critically. Is it really this cultural desert, or is it rather that there's also people that we're using some tools, and everybody maybe has some creativity in them? You know, this is another way of looking at it. But what seems to be there in this context is that people find some things easier. For example, like one person mentioned, yeah, in America, when you go out in an animal costume, you know, it might you feel more weird, but in China you're already weird all the time, so it doesn't really matter. And so this transformation happens by both sides getting frightened by different things, but they're doing it together. So one person is more, there's probably different fears related to it, but yeah, radical expression is one that really goes much further here. Right, I'm going to say only briefly a few words on what I also think is special there. When I went to Dragonburn this year, when somebody told me here they were here, who was it? Who went to Dragonburn? Yeah, you? Yeah, oh yeah, you are. I know you. And when you went inside the zone, again I'm thinking of the Cacophony Society, you had to give away your passport to the authorities. And because Burner culture is a very accepting local authorities. It's a very, it's all, again this dichotomy between accepting and being a little bit revolutionary at the same time. I think Graham has found a good way, but I forgot the term he used for this to express that. I know that I have to think about it. A civilized form of something, you said.
Civilized tribalism.
Yes, that's it. So in this, it seems to be that this unpredictability of the authorities and the space can also somehow maybe enhance the potential of temporary autonomous zones. You have this in the regionals anyway. Some respondents point out like there's more of a void than in the big motherland. But so taking away the passport from people kind of means that they're recognizing us as an autonomous political border, so we need a visa stamp, says this person. They could put it in the passport. Yeah, so instead of waiting for the revolution, we make this temporarily revolutionary society, and then before the authorities know about it and stop it, it disappears. So in a way, like the things that people perceive to be difficult about burning in China also seem to enable something that is very much going back to the roots, which is one of my points I was trying to make here. But also I want to say at the same time, not getting too excited about it all, there's also some misreadings in the Chinese case. There's been this Phoenix burn around, which was like mainly a more commercial or branded sort of thing that you could buy. I don't know much about this because it was before I went there, but maybe you know something and can tell me about it. At a cup of coffee I took to my respondents also, and they all say, it's just classic, but they all said it's typical that this happens in China. It couldn't happen anywhere else. They were pretty clear on that. So I'm going to end with this framing of this, what I would call a distinct formation of the Chinese Burning Man diaspora. Not Chineseness, I really have to stress that always. It creates a distinctive transformative potential, but also this copy culture. And the government context and the unpredictability, it can probably enhance the potential of these autonomous zones, as I said, on the spatial level. And also the appear, the kind of feeling of adventure and all that is definitely there. It takes you back somehow. And radical self-expression meets individualist interest, that's pretty obvious in a way. And then a very pragmatic factor might be the proximity to the transnational community, because it's happening in Shanghai. But then again, this could be anywhere else. So I think it's pretty distinctive that when you look at the Asian landscape, this is the burn, I would say, is the most flourishing one, or whatever the English term for it. And on the doer level, because burners are doers and makers, and this has been proven by some research also, I think it goes kind of well together with something like a Chinese work ethic on the positive level, but on the positive and negative, I don't really want to use these terms, but they're also outsourcing a lot, so there seems to be some potential here. Yeah. Thanks a lot.
Any quick questions? I see two. We'll take a caveat in the back.
Yeah, I want to double check on the use of the term diaspora, the assumptions behind it. How much do the Chinese burners you talked about genuinely feel that they are literally in a diaspora, and how much of it is a metaphorical shorthand that is convenient but we shouldn't take too literally?
Yeah, it's definitely my matter for mostly. Having said that, some came up with it themselves, and some also referred to other diasporic contexts that they are only one. Just this expert situation sometimes seems to be making you aware of these kind of things, but not everybody. I mean, I use the diaspora here a lot in the strict sense of having to flee from the motherland. And most of them are very local people, never been to Germany. Not on the organizational level maybe, but on the non-organizational level.
Thank you.
Next.
I'm curious, a lot of the time people say that Burning Man could only have been possible in America, where there's an emphasis on this kind of fierce individualism.
Yes.
And in China, having never been there, my outside view is that it's much more about the collective, or it's different to kind of individualize yourself or to let your ego shine. And I wonder if there's something that comes through in these events that's more of an emphasis on the hive rather than the person. And maybe we don't have time for it, but I just wanted to surface that curiosity.
Yeah, definitely personal, and really, I see a little bit of that, particularly when I spend time with my, like, I don't know what term I should use, but I was non-expert Chinese friends. I danced with a girl, and she said this was my first dance, and the emphasis was totally on different things, of course, there was no customs, but again, this is very personal, and we watched it, I watched the temple burn, and then there was a funny situation as well, because the authorities was there, and we needed to burn this earlier, and like she was always like